Hello and welcome once again to Android Design in Action. We have a very special episode for you today about navigation drawers, the new pattern introduced at Google I/O 2013. We have some very awesome members of the Android design team, they'll introduce themselves in a moment, that are here to talk to you about the pattern. So that's going to go on for about 20-30 minutes or so, and then we're going to go into a couple of questions that Nick and I have prepared for the team about this awesome new pattern. So just to quickly introduce ourselves, my name is Nurik.
And hi, my name is Nick Fulcher here from London.
Hi, my name is Nagel, interaction designer on the Android design team.
I'm Rich Fulcher, interaction designer on the Android design team, and we're both here in Mountain View.
And yes, actually, this is one of my favorite episodes, I think, so far, because we have folks from Mountain View, New York, and London in the same video hangout at the same time. So anyway, without further ado, Rich, Jens, would you like to take it away?
Sounds great. So I thought we could start by maybe going through a little bit of the history of how the navigation drawer emerged as a pattern. And kind of going back, I think kind of the first app that a lot of people experienced the navigation drawer in on Android, and certainly the first Google app they would have seen it in, was YouTube. Now that drawer that we saw at that time is different in a lot of key ways from the drawer pattern that we discussed last month at I/O. But it still had a lot of the same original objectives, to bring content to the forefront, to get navigation out of the way and have it only use screen real estate when the user was kind of actively trying to change locations. So when we on the design team see a need like that, we kind of have this natural instinct to want to turn it into a pattern that other applications can make use of, because we often see that that need is not specific to a given application or service, but is something that would be a benefit to a larger audience. So the first step that we do as we look at a pattern like that, particularly on Android, is we like to think about how that works from a navigation standpoint. Android, as you know, is special in its use of both the back button and an up affordance in the very commonly used action bar pattern. And as we were looking at the navigation drawer, there were a lot of different ways we could have elected to have it behave in terms of its interaction with those two controls. It could have been that the drawer always presented itself the minute you launched an application and was kind of logically a screen sitting above the other screens. Or it could have been something that was invoked by one of the affordances but not the other, that up would trigger it but not back. Or you could even have other interactions with back where making multiple selections or sequential selections from the drawer could build up a continuous back state. In the end, we went with kind of a pretty straightforward model that the drawer is invoked off the action bar's up affordance in an altered form and doesn't relate to the back button except for closing it. But we like to start with these broad explorations. So what you're seeing on the screen here are some of really the earliest wireframing work we did around this drawer pattern and defining it. After we consider the interaction, we like to look at kind of what the visual storytelling we're going to do with these elements could be. And with the drawer, we had a lot of different options, even just thinking about what that trigger mechanism would look like to let the user would know that there was a drawer there. When YouTube first introduced it, they didn't have any kind of distinct graphic. They just relied on the existing left arrow. But we thought about, well, what if we did a special icon or a glyph to decorate the application icon that would denote there's a drawer, something like the 3 vertical lines that we've come to affectionately know as the hamburger internally here. But there were other options. It could have been that we used a right arrow to indicate this kind of something was emerging from the side, from the left side moving to the right. Or it could have been a less special treatment that, when triggered, used the contextual action bar flavor so that I could dismiss it in the same way that you would dismiss a selection state. Again, we try to look at a range of options. We always try to think about many contexts of use, not just one particular application, and we try to look for ways to produce synergy with other patterns that are already in use, both for developers and for us, most importantly, for users who have certain expectations based on what they've already seen in the platform. Where we ultimately ended up was what you've seen. There's a distinct icon in the action bar, and I can touch it to open it. But we also put a lot of thought into what the gestural mechanisms that could be used to open this should be. So we have the edge swipe available. It's really a shortcut at the top level. It does the exact same action that hitting the action bar would do. But it really comes into its own on lower levels of the application, where that action bar space is being used for hierarchical up, and then the edge swipe can be an immediate way to access that control from deeper within the application.
All right. The navigation drawer is really, a new way of switching top levels inside of your app. There have been already established patterns in Android, such as the six-pack, for example, the spinner, or the fixed tabs that you as developers are probably very familiar with, that serve a similar purpose. Let's look at that real quick. Basically what they do is they allow you to switch between the top levels. So if you look at a really boiled down diagram of an app, the top level is basically the screens that represent the different facets of your app, and that sort of have the function to represent the major use cases of your app and sort of guide you down through the connecting screens down to the consumption level. What you can see is that what those patterns have in common is that they only represent themselves at the top level. So be it the six-pack or be it the tabs, they all rely on a piece of user interface or a piece of Chrome that lives in particular at the top level. Once you navigate away from that, that switching opportunity goes away from you, and if you want to switch back to a different facet, you actually have to navigate up to the top level. And that is actually one of the key differences to the navigation drawer. So if you look here, for example, the navigation drawer does include all the top levels still, at the very minimum, but it now also can include screens at the lower levels. So basically we're thinking about those as navigation hubs, basically places that users will want to often, frequently visit often, or use as a jump-off point to other places in the application. So if you wanted to look at when to use the navigation drawer as opposed to the other patterns that we talked about earlier, here are some helpful statements or helpful guides that can help you make this decision. One of those could be more than 3 top levels. So the navigation drawer is particularly good at showing more content, exposing more content than the other top level switching mechanisms. If you have more than 3 top levels, navigation drawer becomes a possible choice. If you have less, then you can also look at other top-level switching mechanisms, such as tabs, for example, that are very good at exposing the different facets of your app within one view. Also, if you have deep navigation hierarchies, the navigation drawer is a good choice, and here's the reason why. We've seen that as you navigate away from the top level, usually in an app that uses the traditional top level switching mechanisms, you would have to do some considerable navigation effort to get back to the top level and then switch over to a different facet of your app. The navigation drawer helps you here in that it is available from anywhere in the app, and you can just through a side swiping gesture bring it on screen and navigate freely to pretty much anywhere in the app. Also, if your navigation hubs are at deeper levels, the navigation drawer is a good choice. So, for example, if one of your facets basically has navigation hubs at different levels, it makes sense to include them in the navigation drawer in order to jump quickly into those deeper levels. If you have a need for cross navigation, meaning that you want to quickly jump from one facet, maybe at a deeper level, to another facet that also has a deeper level, navigation drawer allows you to do that by including those deeper navigation targets inside of the drawer. Since your navigation drawer has more content, the navigation drawer gives you also options to structure your content better. So you can, for example, as we can see here, you can add headers, dividers, and icons in order to, group certain areas of functionality better. We also introduced collapsible items. So those are another means of structuring your content by adding subordinate items, typically content items, to top level items. Maybe a couple of notes to some interaction details. One other thing about the navigation drawer is that it does not have a lot of representation on the screen. So if you look at an app that has a navigation drawer, the defining characteristic is really the navigation drawer icon in the top left. So in order for people to understand how navigation works in that particular app and that a navigation drawer is actually present, we wanted to make sure that as people launch an application for the first time, that they are sort of confronted with the navigation drawer and sort of see what options they have, what sort of the top level activities are that they can take advantage of in your app. So upon first launch, open the navigation drawer. People then can navigate freely from there in your app, or just simply dismiss the navigation drawer and get to the main content that way. Once they're beyond that point, once they have actually opened the navigation drawer manually for the first time, on subsequent launches, then don't show the navigation drawer on launch anymore. So in that way, you make sure that people know that there's a navigation drawer, how to interact with it.
One of my favorite things I wanted to point out about that was that basically, you get the ability to tell the user about the gesture and about the physical space in which the navigation drawer interacts, right? So if you initially show the navigation drawer, and then you kind of, they hide it by either touching outside into the content area or touching the up affordance or anything like that, they basically, the navigation drawer immediately slides to the left, and it kind of hints that if you pull out from the left, you'll actually see it again. So it almost hints at the gestures involved with that kind of initial impression that you get.
Yeah, in that sense, it's a really important learning step, right? To get you familiar with what the app is really all about, and also how the navigation drawer actually works and functions. Then the second thing I wanted to point out is to give the user a peek, and that is really to make the navigation drawer more detectable and also more tangible. If you use the library that we provide for implementing the navigation drawer, you don't really need to worry about this, because that's already automatically taken care of, and you get this for free. But what it really does, if as users explore applications with their fingers and then maybe accidentally touch on the left edge of the screen, then your drawer peeks in a little bit and sort of gives you a good affordance, good feedback that you can drag the navigation drawer out from the left onto the rest of the screen. Finally, we often get the question, well, if I use the navigation drawer, should I have this navigation drawer icon at all levels of my app? Should it be represented on all screens? And the answer is really no. Only those screens that are represented in the navigation drawer should actually have a navigation drawer image. All other screens have the traditional up caret. And the reason for that is really as we were developing this, we sort of entertained the idea of having access to the navigation drawer via the application icon throughout, but it really felt like it creates a separate brand of applications with a different navigation model that is not consistent with other Android applications that sort of sit side by side with navigation drawer applications. So in that sense, we for screens that are not typical jump-off points or are not high-value navigation targets, we keep the up affordance there intact.
So just to interject there, so on those other screens where you have the up affordance, it's still accessible via the kind of the bezel swipe, the edge swipe, right?
Oh yeah, absolutely.
So in that way, it's kind of like an accelerator, like a keyboard shortcut. So for power users who know about it, like you have this method of easily pulling up the navigation from anywhere they want, while still retaining the familiar navigation, kind of hierarchical navigation with the up, right?
Exactly. It's good that you mentioned that. So the navigation drawer is accessible or should be accessible from all levels, and the navigation drawer image is really sort of this short little reminder that the navigation drawer or that you're at a place where navigating away with the navigation drawer is a likely option.
Yeah, it's also kind of, if you had an application that just used the up affordance, at that topmost screen, that left pointing caret would go away. And that was kind of an indication to the user that you are at a special place. You're at the kind of logical top of the application. Mm-hmm. The presence of the 3-line drawer indicator does much the same thing now. You're getting a slightly different look at what the action bar is. And again, it's just kind of reinforcing. You're at the home of the app. You're at this logical place from which you can go to lots of different destinations, and you can use the drawer to accomplish that. So now I'd just like to run through a few examples, and we can talk about some of the different uses of the drawer. And I thought I would just go through a number of the Google apps that have been recently released that make use of the drawer. And the first one is Gmail, which probably many people are well acquainted with. In the latest version of Gmail, we've introduced the drawer, and the drawer is used kind of for two different capabilities. The most expected one is that it's used to move between my inbox and other supporting labels, so doing the same kind of navigation that was previously available from a spinner in the primary action bar. It's also accommodating the ability to switch between accounts. So kind of at the top of the drawer, you see the radio button for the currently active account. And we would just kind of introduce more and more of those if there were more accounts present. Using the drawer as an account switching mechanism is something that's used by a couple of the Google apps. You'll notice in Google Drive, for instance, they also support this. They use a spinner within the drawer in that case, because the perception is that account switching is a less frequently required task for Drive users. Whereas for Gmail, we have this stronger presumption of if you have these two Google accounts, you're likely checking mail in both of those accounts. So rather than having a two-touch operation of touch on spinner to open, touch on account to transition, we want to expand those account options directly into the drawer. So we use the radio button approach there. The drawer also makes use of kind of additional content for the items. So you're seeing counts of unread items for each of the selected labels. Again, more kind of metadata that helps guide a user to which destination they may wish to go to. The other thing that's good to note about the way that Gmail uses the drawer is the way that the action bar transforms when the drawer is open. So in its kind of natural state, when you're looking at the inbox, you have actions for compose or for search. And those are operations that relate specifically to that account that you have present. And you're going to be generating a new email from that account. You'll be searching the content of that account. Because the drawer covers content that could be from multiple accounts, when we open that, those actions are suppressed and they just disappear from the action bar. We always want the actions that you show within the action bar when the drawer is open to relate to the entire application context. So we just kind of remove those that have a tighter focus or tighter scope.
So I had one quick question, I guess. So here in Gmail, we see the use of standard hollow list headers. to indicate different kind of segments or different sections of labels. And then above that, you obviously have the account types or the accounts to choose from. Whereas you guys also talked about the option to have collapsible items. Can you talk a little bit about the difference when you would use one versus the other?
Sure. So for Gmail, we just kind of expand all of those items and don't use a collapse, largely because the relative ordering of the items within there kind of naturally supports the most frequently used destinations appearing at the top, and then just supporting a continuous scroll with a very predictable order to it. Once I get kind of past my recent or system level labels, I'm just in an A to Z listing of all the labels that I've created or that I manage. So there's kind of not a lot of need in that case since it is really just one collection that you're opening, to have more fine-grained controls over that presentation. If, however, you had a number of such categories, you wouldn't want the user to have to kind of scroll through the full contents of the second and third category to get to the fourth one. And so in those types of situations, compacting makes a lot of sense. It's just kind of, you're using the option to compact or expand those items as a way to accelerate the user getting to the sub-items that they need to reach.
Makes sense. Thanks.
Sure.
Well, we're talking about kind of having different groups of content and also the expanding collapsing pattern. Do you have any recommendations about kind of the maximum size? I mean, you probably wouldn't want some kind of unbounded list in a navigation drawer, right? Do you have any kind of guidelines about where we might stop?
Yeah, I mean, I think the strongest guideline is that you don't want to kind of try to replicate all of the data that your app is trying to express inside of the drawer. Now, if you find that you have a lot of targets, but they have a very predictable ordering to them, so you may have a user who uses dozens of labels in Gmail. That's still a fairly suitable usage because, again, it's highly predictable. You know exactly what you're going to get, and the content that you're trying to express for each is kind of pretty tight. It's really just a label and a count. For other situations where you have more content, where it's dynamic, where that's changing on a more regular basis, those are the kind of things that I think work less well as navigation. And it might just be that you kind of need to pull those out and express them kind of in the full context of your app, rather than just trying to accommodate them into the drawer. And I would say if you don't fit into this notion of having kind of categories or well-ordered sets of content, and you're finding that you have a lot of distinct navigation destinations within the drawer, it might be worth taking a little step back and kind of thinking about how you're structuring your application. Mm-hmm. It may simply just be too broad. There might be ways that you could kind of, in a sense, lose a little bit of speed of accessing this wide breadth of options by adding a little bit more depth to your application, and as a result making it just kind of more kind of naturally and easily understood by the user, and taking advantage of the relationship between distinct but related destinations that maybe want to get presented in a more combined format further down the app's hierarchy.
Yeah. We've definitely given folks the feedback in the past that, hey, your app is doing too much. Like, focus on the couple of things that you can do really well and do those, and obviously then your list of different sections in the app gets trimmed down to something smaller and more manageable. But we've definitely given the feedback that maybe this is multiple apps, or maybe you should trim out some of the functionality that you don't need.
Yeah. And I think on the lower end, we talked about 3 top levels, as a starting point or 4 top levels, I should say, as the starting point for using the navigation drawer. You want to make sure that the navigation drawer is not underpopulated. So if you, for example, imagine navigation drawer only having 2 items, 3 items, it feels too much white space. It feels too underpopulated, and there are other top level switching mechanisms that could be a better choice there.
That's actually a great lead into the next example I wanted to cover, which is the way that the play apps make use of the navigation drawer. So what you're seeing here are the Play Music and the Play Books app. At the left, Play Music opens up and it has 5 different navigation options. And it could add more. It's scalable, so as kind of there are more ways of consuming your music, we can naturally suit that in. And that's also, I think, something that goes into that decision, not just kind of where you are immediately in your app, but what you see the roadmap for the next version or the version after that. So kind of planning ahead for more significant navigation needs might also be a good reason to adopt the drawer slightly early. But in this particular case, we've got kind of somewhat symmetric ordering of the options between these two different apps that focus on different types of media. They both start with kind of this now-oriented context, either listen now for music or read now for books. They then go into kind of looking at the way that your library is structured and ways you can consume it. Music has more options in that regard because it also supports playlists and instant mixes, but it's still those are versions of how is the content organized. And both of these navigation drawers then terminate with a shop option, which is actually not even an internal navigation, it's a handoff to the Play Store. By presenting those similar structures in similar orders between these different but related applications, you're helping the user build up a good mental model of what they expect a Play app to feel like and how they can kind of quickly learn ways to navigate them and apply what they learn in one context to another.
Mm-hmm.
One of the nice side effects, I guess, of having Shop open up the Play Store is that actually the Play Store also uses the kind of the branded single accent color action bar. Like once you jump into the Shop for books area, you actually get a blue action bar with the books icon and so on. Actually, no, it's the Play icon on the top left. But there is some kind of persistence of state. You're not jumping into a completely separate experience. It's still kind of part of the same family of products.
Yes, definitely. And then your kind of back navigation away has some interesting effects there as well. So,
right.
Mm-hmm. The next example I wanted to look at was Google Earth, which has some slightly non-traditional usage of the navigation drawer, but I just wanted to kind of talk about this a little bit because I think it's interesting. The first thing I'll point out is that Earth doesn't use a proper action bar. It's because it's a very search-focused activity. It uses that real estate that you would expect an action bar to use at the top to present a field where the user can always touch to put in a destination that they'd like to refocus that view upon. And it doesn't have kind of the standard actions or overflow at the right-hand side that a normal action bar would present. But it still can present the app icon and it can present the glyph indicating the presence of the drawer. And then touching that effectively leaves the action bar in place. Again, it's not an action bar, but it's giving it that same kind of stability that the drawer would expect and just kind of sliding the content of the drawer in, sitting properly beneath that kind of pseudo action bar. Earth uses the navigation drawer not so much for navigation, although it does have elements of that. That Earth gallery target at the bottom is a proper navigation link. But it's using it to in effect filter the view or set preferences about kind of the level of detail that you want to see in the primary view. Another option for this would have been to continue to use the drawer pattern, but to rely on a right-hand side drawer instead of kind of trying to present it in the traditional navigation space. You could present it at right and make it more about filtering. But there are trade-offs involved in that as well in terms of how you indicate the presence of that drawer and how that would affect the action bar and even the branding that comes with having the app icon at the top. Relatedly, if you look at the Google One Today application, this is an application that's focused on charitable giving and encourages users through a notification to make a $1 donation every day to various organizations and efforts. It uses both a left and a right drawer, and I think it does a really excellent job of it. The left drawer is standard navigation. You open it up and you can move between kind of either looking at the current offer or other things like looking at your profile, kind of your giving history. The right-hand side drawer is focused on notifications, and it's invoked either by a right edge swipe, a right to left edge swipe, or by touching on the notification count action in the action bar. And touching there does the exact same animation you would see. So you'd see it kind of slide in from the side. You're teaching you again that you can probably perform this gesture to invoke it, using the animation to tell that story to the user about how that drawer performs. And these drawers actually can move directly from one to the other as well, which is, you're going to have to play with it to see the effect. But it's really neatly done. They kind of chase each other at proper speed, and the animation's well implemented.
Awesome. So I think that's all the content, the pre-canned content you guys had about navigation drawers. And obviously, for folks that are looking to implement this, a couple of quick points. All the design guidelines are available on developer.android.com/designs/patterns/navigation-jar, something like that. Just go to the design site and you'll see it there. And the second thing is, if you're a developer looking to implement this, Nick and I actually did an I/O presentation on navigation drawers. Actually, we talked about other things as well, but the Android Design for UI Developers presentation has implementation tips. And also, Rich and Jens, you guys did a presentation at I/O about structure and app design, right? So this is also well covered there. So lots of good resources outside of this video if you're looking to implement. So I think we have a few minutes left. We should probably go through a couple of questions. I know there's some burning hot questions from the community that I wanted to ask you guys. We probably have time for like 3 or 4. And let's I guess start with one of the popular ones. So a lot of the community implementations of navigation drawers out there actually, rather than overlaying content, they slide it out of the way, or I guess they kind of push it to the side. Some push the action bar, some don't. But our pattern, our implementation actually overlays the content. Can you guys talk a little bit about the reasoning and the decision-making process for that?
Sure. Let me break it into 2 parts, because I think there's kind of 2 interesting things that we were looking at pretty extensively during our exploration of this. The first is the question of keeping the action bar in place. And that was a decision we were able to come to fairly quickly. We thought there was a lot of value to kind of, even as that drawer component comes in, keeping a stable element that just really speaks to the identity and the context that you're currently within the application. It gave us the ability to transform the action set to open up and show actions that maybe weren't in the immediate context but had global relevance to the app and could be convenient accelerators for things you would want to do from any context. So we very early on latched onto the idea that we'd want to keep the action bar present. We definitely looked a lot at, should we push the content or should we slide the panel over? I think we had a kind of a gut instinct that we thought slide was going to be interesting because of the desire to, as Jens talked about before, of bringing the drawer in from kind of deeper levels of the hierarchy. That even when the affordance wasn't there, you'd want to be able to bring the drawer in. And it felt more natural to us to think of it sliding over as opposed to kind of existing to the left of all of these different spaces of hierarchy. And kind of more thinking and more experimentation with that led us to, just as we were playing with these different prototypes, we always put a strong focus on the importance of direct manipulation to the user, that we want them to feel like when their finger goes down on a device and they start moving it, that the content is really strongly anchored to that and responding directly. If we were to do the push, there are some conditions where that wouldn't feel that way. So if it's that I have my main screen and then beside it the drawer sits and it's just kind of slightly off screen. Well, if those two are really married together in that way, then you would expect that a drag, a kind of a pull on that main surface would bring the drawer in naturally. If we were to do that, then you wouldn't be able to do the swipe to do any other action within that main view. You couldn't use kind of a view pager. You couldn't use swipe to dismiss. In the Earth example, you couldn't even pan within the view of the globe that you're seeing there.
That would be a non-starter.
Yeah, so we didn't want to kind of set up this relationship that didn't feel authentic and feel true for all of these manipulations. So by saying, no, it's an edge swipe, and that's pulling it, and it's just pulling this surface and not affecting the one that you're not touching, we felt like that gave the most direct feedback and just simply felt the best to users as we experimented with it.
Yeah.
Awesome.
And I also think that it somewhat has a more non-modal feel to it, in that it feels like a little navigation helper that you can pull on screen, that does not give you the impression that this level that you're pushing out of the way is directly linked to the content that you're pulling onto the screen. So the two only have an indirect hierarchical relationship, right? Whereas if you push the content out of the way, they sort of feel like they're stuck together, and one is directly subordinate to the other. And that sort of would not work if you pull in something from the lower levels of the screen, as Richard pointed out earlier.
Makes sense. Nick, did you have any questions?
Yeah, I wanted to ask a little bit more about kind of right-hand drawers. You touched on it a little bit in the talking about Earth and One Today, but it's not something we've particularly documented in the design guidelines. So the way I see it is we're kind of sticking to the general arrangement with the action bar. So navigation is always on the left, and actions tend to be on the right-hand side. So that's the way you see a breakdown. So it's perfectly legitimate to use a left-hand drawer and a right-hand drawer, or one or the other.
Yeah. So definitely, as we've seen in the example with Google Earth, one option could have been to take all the settings content, which is not directly navigation content, move it over to the right. For me, I sometimes break it down as things on the right, the actions or settings that usually are in the overflow. They're contextual to the view, right? So if I pull in something from the right, invoke an action, or do customizations of a view, they're all directly related to the view that I'm currently looking at. Whereas navigation is more at a meta level, right? It helps me to reach the different destinations inside of my app, whereas the right-hand stuff sort of manipulates the stuff that I'm currently looking at.
Cool. So I had two more questions. I'll ask the first one first, I guess. So Google Hangouts is another application that was released recently, and it actually uses something that is somewhat similar to the navigation jar, but it's different. So for developers out there, it's really the difference between jar layout and sliding pane layout. So can you guys talk a little bit about the difference between something like a navigation jar and something like what Google Hangouts uses to kind of have list of stuff on the left and details on the right?
Sure. I mean, I think the easiest way to kind of think about that difference is to kind of take a slight step back and think about what function the different elements are trying to perform within each of those contexts. So the traditional navigation drawer is, in a sense, it's I want to get away from the current context and I want to go somewhere else. What's currently here isn't interesting me anymore, so I want to go elsewhere. For Hangouts, it's a slightly different case. And for a few reasons. One is that kind of the two panes that are interacting, for those who haven't used it, it's kind of a list of all the conversations that I have ongoing, and then that intersects with a detail view of a given conversation, which kind of appears to slide in front of it, but leave a slight edge of the conversation view, conversation list still in place. That list of conversations is not as simple a set of data objects as a normal navigation drawer would use. It's not just a label and perhaps a count. It's who is in this conversation. It's an icon that might be an aggregate of up to 4 different participants. It may have a snippet of what the last message was and who said it. If it's an image, it could be a preview of the image. If there's an ongoing video hangout that's there, that may be indicated. It may be time-stamped. It has kind of a read, unread status. So there's actually a lot of data that every item in that conversation list is communicating. And it's completely dynamic. You can swipe it away, you can kind of archive conversations, new conversations can come in, conversations can reorder, and all of those things make it kind of significantly distinct from what we would traditionally use a navigation drawer for. So because of those reasons, we wanted to still have that sense of the relationship between the panel and the kind of notion of, even when I'm within the detail view of one particular hangout, I can still see what's going on in those other hangouts, especially on tablets and larger form factors. I can get the sense of, oh, there's a new message here because that moved up, and there's a new person talking there perhaps, and these other ones are just decaying and they're not having anything interesting happen to them. So kind of it had those properties of more information, dynamic content, and just the ability to kind of peek even without having to pull the drawer in on some devices, that made it kind of, in our estimation, best to use a variation in a sense of that pattern rather than just going ahead and just using the drawer or just using a simple hierarchic list where there's no distinct relationship. We wanted to create a relationship between those two spaces, but not quite as strong as the drawer.
Okay, it actually folds very nicely into my last question that I had. So some people, some folks may need or may find themselves in cases where they need some sort of like kind of dynamic items. So for example, let's say I have 3 major items like explore or like home, explore, and shop, right? And then let's say that you allow the user to favorite certain items throughout the or maybe even favorite certain sections. Like let's say your sports app, maybe you're favoriting certain leagues or certain teams even. What do you guys see as or is it appropriate to use or to show these types of items in the navigation drawer?
I think it's totally appropriate, and I think those collapsible items are a good way of structuring this content. If you think, for example, about an app like Google Drive, for example, where you have certain folders that you visit regularly, you could employ something like a frequency, a recency scheme, or even explicit favorite scheme by starring a particular folder in order to represent this in the navigation drawer to make it quickly accessible once I get back to the app. Right. So I think those dynamic items are a nice way of making frequently needed content more accessible.
Awesome.
Yeah. And on top, the fact that they're collapsible, if I can add that, sort of helps to keep the entire layout clean, right? So sort of if I don't want to look at those options, I can hide them and sort of focus on the pure top level navigation, for example.
That makes perfect sense. All right, Nick, do you have anything you want to add real quick before we sign off? Or any?
I wanted to just pick up on one thing that one of my favorite lines in the pattern in the design guidelines says that the navigation drawer isn't a good fit for every single app out there, and I just wanted to talk about that a little bit. I mean, it's kind of like the hot new thing, right? So kind of lots of cool and interesting apps are picking up on this pattern, and I can see lots of people running towards it just because it's interesting. So I think it's really important to bear in mind kind of some of the guidelines that Jens pointed out, like when to use it earlier on. And also I'd say don't be lazy as well. Don't if you have this extra space in a navigation drawer, you can see that some people might run towards it and end up just chucking the kitchen sink in there because they have the space to play with. Much like your navigation talk from Google I/O, where you go through using use cases and other modeling tools to really kind of look at your content to work out what the major kind of areas are. I think that's super important when deciding what goes in the drawer and what shouldn't. You need to really think about the content. So I just wanted to say, yeah, it's an awesome pattern and it has some really great use cases, but it's not for everyone, right?
Yeah. Exactly. As you start to structure your app, you really should spend some time on deciding what your top-level navigation scheme should be, and it really should serve the purpose of your app. So if your top-level navigation is all about spur-of-the-moment switching, quick switching between different facets, fixed tabs are the best way of doing that. Of course, as you have more top levels, you're running out of space there, then you might have to do something different. But even in those cases, if you think about the Google I/O app from this year, for example, you can think about combining certain facets into one view in order to still only have 3 options in your fixed tab. So, for example, the Google I/O app used Explore as one tab that included maps, and I think the different tracks for the conference. So here, we sort of took, the maps facet and the tracks facet, and we combined it into an Explore facet. And the switching between the facets using the tab control was still super fast and accessible.
Cool. And Rich, anything you want to add before we sign off?
No, I mean, I will just echo, just don't go with the fad for the fad's sake. Be thoughtful. Something we had a lot of fun doing for the I/O talk was just taking the Google apps and just kind of considering, well, what if the app you know and love used a completely different navigation structure? Would that work? What would that look like? Would that be suitable? That's an exercise that anybody can do kind of pretty quickly, just even to pencil sketch it out. And that even if you don't kind of want to think about it from this very philosophical viewpoint of how navigation should work, just drawing it out and getting a gut sense of it is pretty significant.
Awesome. Well, I think we've run way over time, but this is great because there's a lot of good content, a lot of new good content, a lot of things that weren't in the guidelines that we probably should put in the guidelines at some point. But really, really glad to get you guys' take on the navigation drawer and all the different aspects of it. So with that, thanks everybody for tuning in to a very long episode of Android Design in Action. Tune in, I think, next week or the week after for some pretty interesting more stuff around Google Play. I think, that's it for this episode. So thanks.
Great.
Adios.
Thanks for having us.
Yeah.